If only we had three awesome experts to join us. Chuck Todd, Casey Hunt, NBC political analyst Steve Schmidt. None of who, altogether, you probably had 4 hours of sleep if we combined you.
Who had 4?
I know. No, it was like a combination.
Yeah.
All right, so split decision last night, Chuck. Everybody talked about the blue wave, this notion that Democrats were going to come roaring back in the midterms. Do you think it was a blue wave?
No, Democrats won the popular vote and the Republicans won the Electoral College. I feel like in some ways a deja vu, meaning, look, more people went to the polls to vote for Democrats in Congress than not. That's why Democrats won the House. That's why they've got this majority. But the president has enough support in enough places to win big races in states that have large enough rural populations to either offset suburban America or whatever. So, yes, I mean, I think it's a split decision, but we're going to look at this. This was a realignment election, not a wave election. This is simply the country sorting itself to its politics.
Casey, what is this going to look like? So some people say it's checks and balances, and some people say it's going to be like gridlock. So if you were to look into your crystal ball and tell us what's going to happen for the next couple of years, what would we see?
In some ways, it's both, Hoda. I do think it's going to be very difficult to move anything through Washington, and that could lead to some crises, more government shutdowns, a lot of uncertainty, because, quite frankly, there's going to be a lot of pressure on Democrats not to make deals with President Trump coming from the left of the party. Don't forget, 2020 basically starts today. There's probably 6 or so Democrats in the Senate who are going to start running for president right away. But think about who the people are that are going to be coming to Washington in this new class of Democrats. They are largely from the Midwest. They are largely from suburban areas. They have largely run on messages of, being a check on the president, but also making Washington work. So that's going to be a real push and pull on Nancy Pelosi, who has already come out and said, you know what, we are not here to impeach President Trump.
Steve, one of the things that still looks like it might be a bit striking, and granted, we're still waiting on some of the final exit polling to come out, but this idea that there might be 2, maybe 3% of people, when asked by pollsters whether you support the president, whether you support his agenda, and either they're just not telling the truth to pollsters, or maybe they're just not telling the truth to pollsters. I mean, it seems as if, looking at some of these numbers, looking at some of the races, that maybe we were off a bit again when it came to our polling and how much we underestimated this president.
I think when you look at the polling, Craig, that going in, you were looking at 8-9 points generic lead for the Democrats. And that's where, at the end of the day, they're going to perform. It'll be about a 9% victory, which from my perspective is a pretty significant repudiation of the Trump administration, given that we have an unemployment rate of 3.7% in the country. The last time you saw a gap that big, it was in 2008 when the economy was in free fall. We were in the middle of a very unpopular war, and Barack Obama had just won. And I don't think that the significance of the size of the popular vote, if you will, should be diminished in this.
So is it a vindication of the president's strategy in those red states? There were tight races, the polls showed, and in the end, in quite a few of them, the Republican prevailed. Did the president hoist them over the finish line?
He prevented a wave. All right, one of the ways you do get political waves is one party is demoralized when the other party is fired up. And what we saw is Republicans weren't demoralized. So what the president did, and he did it with some very questionable tactics, if you will, of trying to stoke his political base, is that it worked. The fact of the matter, he was right and Paul Ryan was wrong. Right? Paul Ryan said, no, close with the economy, close with taxes. And he said, no, I'm going to close with immigration because people, what did he say? The economy's boring. In that sense, it worked because the president is conducting a culture war. Okay, this is a campaign. He is the lead general in this for his side here. And I think that this is something where Democrats have to get their heads around. The immigration issue isn't a policy problem for them. It's symbolic on the right, and the president uses it very effectively.
Well, there's a lot to talk about with Casey, especially with regard to Democrats' newfound power in the House and what that means in terms of investigations and subpoenas. And I know you're coming back to talk about that in just a few. Guys, thank you.
All right,
appreciate
guys,
it.
Thank you.